Do indie games even exist anymore? Lately, there's been a Cambrian explosion of independent game development. I mean, if you look around, it seems like these days there's more indie games than non-indie games. But because of the huge variety of indie games, it makes me wonder what an indie game actually even is.
What are indie games?
Now you're probably thinking, Jamin, come on. It's pretty obvious what an indie game is. We use the term all the time. You just used it like 10 times a couple seconds ago. But when you really take a look, it's not quite so clear. So allow me, for the sake of argument, to reenact my internal debate for you. Well, the most obvious definition of indie games are those made by independent studios. You know, fight the power. I can do that because I'm half black. But studios like Epic, Respawn, and even Valve are technically independent of major publishers like Electronic Arts, Ubisoft, Take-Two, Activision, and so forth. I mean, Valve has over 70 million active users for Steam. That doesn't really strike me as scrappy, do-it-yourself in your dad's garage indie, you know? Okay, let's limit it further. Indie games are made by small studios. Well, it's better, but small compared to what? Like your local grocery store or like Walmart? Like what scale are we using to define small? If you look at Capybara Games, who makes indie games like Super Time Force or below, they have close to 40 team members. That's not just 2 dudes in their basement. Or if you look at Telltale Games, they have over 200 people and they make games like The Walking Dead. But technically, I guess they're an indie as well. I mean, that's close, but keep trying. Okay, fine. That's a good point. So maybe being an indie game maker has more to do with the number of copies that you sell. But what about Minecraft? Isn't that the quintessential indie game, or did it stop being indie when it sold its 14 millionth copy? Oh, okay, well that's what's supposed to happen, right? Indie games are supposed to be successful. That's the whole point. I mean, what matters is that Minecraft was made on a shoestring budget. That's what makes it indie. But Journey, a beloved indie game, cost multiple millions to make and was funded by Sony. Star Citizen just raised $43 million via crowdfunding. Come on, dude. Okay, maybe it's not the cost per se, but it's about, you know, the indie spirit. It's not about complex distribution deals or making money. So that eliminates Team Meat then. They were so anxious to get on the Xbox 360 dashboard. Or Jonathan Blow, who showed off The Witness last year at Sony's E3 press conference. Okay, so really deep down, indie is about having a charming, small-time aesthetic. I mean, Team Meat made Super Meat Boy in 8-bit. I think of the words of Justice Potter Stewart when I think of indie games. He said, "I know it when I see it." He was talking about something else, but still, I think it applies. But Dear Esther is an incredibly realistic game. I mean, so is The Swapper or No Man's Sky. I mean, those are indie games, right? No matter which way you look at it, left Jamin or right Jamin, it's all very complicated and messy and maybe a little bit emotional. So you can understand why I'm a little bit confused about whether or not indie games even exist. Here's what I'm thinking has happened. Indie games as a concept, as a medium, as a movement, and as a commercial viability have become so big that we can't really justifiably use the term indie games anymore. If you look historically, before digital distribution, making, creating, and distributing an independent game was really hard. Rogue, for example, was passed around university mainframes. Jeff Minter and his mother Hazel actually mailed out floppy disks from their house. But as games became increasingly more advanced, making an indie game that someone could actually get and then actually play became almost impossible. Expensive tools started to become required, and if you wanted to make a game for a console, then, well, that required a license, and that was expensive, and the cartridges themselves weren't exactly cheap. Some artists continued to make shareware and careware and postcardware and all other kinds of wares. But the reality was that indie game makers faced the dual threat of both the technical limitations of game making itself and the high cost of distribution. Fast forward to today, and the landscape for games has dramatically changed. I cannot understate this. Game engines are now much more widely available, resulting in creations like The Stanley Parable or Gone Home. And with the internet now more than ever before, it's easier to get your games out to the public. So you can use Kickstarter or Steam Greenlight, publish a mobile game, or do a self-printed board game. It's still not easy to make a good game, but anyone who wants to get started can. Now, I'm certainly not the first person to suggest this, but what if we just drop the whole indie thing? Papers, Please creator Lucas Pope said that labels like indie are a little redundant, and the categorization between AAA and indie is increasingly dissolving. This is the guy who won the grand prize at the Independent Games Festival, so I think he knows what he's talking about. And whether or not you feel this way, indie games, the label, can have some unfortunate prejudices. I mean, some people think that all indie games are 8-bit chiptune platformers with terrible gameplay that reflect on the existential reality of life. I mean, look at this lovely flower of a post on IGN, or 33% of these pollsters, or these terrible Google autocorrect results. This is what people think when they think indie games. And these stereotypes belie the fact that every day there's a wide variety of games that are being created of all different shapes and sizes. Some of them have big budgets, some of them have small budgets, some of them have low poly abstract graphics, others have super glossy, highly realistic graphics. And the sad truth is that many of these games would appeal to the kind of person who only plays quote unquote mainstream titles. The kind of person who says, I don't play indie games. Yes, it's nice to support designers who are taking creative risks, but at the end of the day, it's about playing great games, regardless of the source. For example, if you like Battlefield 4, then you might also like the lesser known Natural Selection 2. If you like Donkey Kong Country for the Wii U, then you'll also get your kicks playing super hard platformer VVVVVV. Is that right? But the fundamental problem is that liking a game like Natural Selection 2 or a game like Outlast has no bearing on whether or not you're gonna like a game like Gone Home or Dear Esther. But because of the indie label, they're all lumped together, which is ridiculous. We need to be really, really honest here. Today, the only link between indie games isn't budget, isn't team size, isn't aesthetics, isn't distribution. It's marketing. And yes, there will always be people making games with limited resources, and yes, it will always be hard. But as we've seen with labels, the term indie has some serious drawbacks. I mean, by grouping together game makers who really don't have very much in common, you're keeping people out who would be interested in your titles, but don't like the indie moniker or don't feel like they fit in.
Raid is an art house masterpiece, nothing like your mainstream kiddie games.
But you had jump on the Goombas.
Does this look like a Goomba to you?
Yes.
The real question facing these games is, how do we cultivate an environment where good games of any stripe ultimately are found? It's less important what we call them. So what do you think? Has the term indie outlived its usefulness? And in the spirit of creating spaces to showcase new work, if you're a game designer and you have something that you've been toiling away on, hit us up on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, comments section, smoke signal, you know, whatever you have lying around. If we get enough good entries of things that you all have been working on, we'll try and find a way to feature them on the show. I'm really excited to see what you all have been doing in your spare time. In the meantime, hash it out in the comments, and if you like what you saw, please subscribe. I'll see you next week. Last week we talked about the future of games. Let's see what you had to say. Flyzone has predictions for the future, most of them involving games, including Pokemon, Green, Purple, Blue, but I'm most looking forward to the one that you mentioned, The Legend of Zelda, Clarinet of Space-Time. I've read about this one, and it involves Link and Zelda joining a high school band, touring the universe, and boring everyone to death. VK has Kiro0613, who is clearly a humanoid robot, but one who's interested in this show. Thank you very much for watching. VKS is interested in this idea that maybe someday people will stop blaming video games for violence, mass murder, things like that. I hope that day has come. In some ways, maybe that day has come already, but if you look at Reason this month, there's an excellent piece about all the moral panics that have happened around video games. So you know, a moral panic is when collectively a community freaks out about a particular thing. So it would have been rap music in the 90s, it would have been comic book in the 60s, it would have been hot jazz before that. So clearly video games are part of a long, long successful legacy, but yeah, I hope that they no longer take the blame for everything as well in the future too. Jacob D says that we should all come back here 50 years from now to this particular comment thread in this video and see how right or wrong we actually were. So everybody, all right, let's all do this together. Siri, remind me in 50 years to come back to YouTube.
Here's your reminder for May 15th, 2064 at 9 a.m. Shall I create it?
Absolutely. Leonard Greenland points out a mission that I made, and it's a really, really good one. So Leonard points to these new Escape the Room physical games that have been popping up in places like New York and San Francisco. They're based on these really popular Escape the Room type games that are on mobile and on PC, on browser and things like that. I do think that that's something we'll absolutely see in the future, this idea that people get together to go to a physical space to solve a puzzle together. That's really exciting. As long as it doesn't turn into like the Running Man where people die and they lock you in a room and then you starve to death. But aside from that, totally great suggestion. Jerry Seekers Jr. really hopes that consoles continue to last into the future, if only because he's already invested time and effort into maintaining the things he has. He points out that he knows that in the future, if he has a working NES system and an NES cartridge, that he can play those. That's actually a really, really fascinating thing as we're moving forward into the next generation of games. The last factory that made CRT monitors, the ones that were used for old arcade games, went out of business, which means that there will never be any more arcade games that look exactly the way the ones did 30 years ago. So it is going to be this really big open question for people who own this legacy hardware 20 years from now. Like, if something breaks, there's not going to be a person that you can go to help you fix it. You know what I mean? So yeah, I hope that those games don't sort of wander into obsolescence, but maintaining hardware is going to be a very, very serious concern for collectors or people who are interested in maintaining the past. Bafar takes issue with my comparison of Quidditch and LARPing, in large part because now the people who play Quidditch are trying to distance themselves from the J.K. Rowling universe and establish it as its own unique sport, which is exactly my point, is that Quidditch has now crossed over from a place where it was just roleplay into something that's much more, ostensibly mainstream. And I'm saying that, that could happen with lots of other types of LARPing in the future. So don't be surprised. So yes, thank you for affirming my point. We agree. Hey there, welcome. If this is your first time watching Game Show, you may have some questions about me and my glasses, specifically whether or not they have lenses in them. They don't, but if you go back to the very first episode, you'll see that the same exact frames do have lenses in them, and we took them out because it was distracting because of all the glare. But in real life, these are the exact same frames that I wear everywhere. I've been wearing the same frames for like the last 15 years. You can Google them. So either this is the most epic, long-running troll that predates Game Show and dates all the way back to my teenage years, or we just tried to make a change to make the videos look a little bit nicer. But it's your call.